it's the puny giant once again. I'm gonna try this again. I know it's been a while. Let's go ahead and get into this. I recorded this video probably about a month or so ago. It's about a month ago. And I shared it with a dear friend of mine who is a spiritual mentor. And I received some criticism, some correction, some faithful wounds, if you will. And I thought, yeah, this is actually a good opportunity to practice some of what I'm going to talk about with this particular topic. So here we are, I'm recording it again. And I hope you like it. If you like these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share these videos. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy, is what we're discussing today. Of course, that's from the proverb. What are faithful wounds? These are hurts inflicted by others, but with good intentions. Even more than that, the intentions are well reasoned and the wounds are administered effectively. Now, we tend to fail at both aspects of faithful wounds, the giving and the receiving. On the receiving end, ego gets in the way sometimes, and we don't want to feel uncomfortable. We want to be right. We don't want to be wrong. There's an uncomfortable feeling with being wrong, and there's a reason for that. It's hard for us to give them well also. Again, ego gets in the way. We don't empathize well with the individual we're giving the wounds to. Sometimes we can give them from a very self-righteous position, with an air of superiority. We want to be right oftentimes. So you see, there's some similarities there. Ego is really what gets in the way oftentimes with both the receiving and the giving of faithful wounds. Now, both failures tend to have this in common: pride. We can either be overly concerned about our own feelings in the matter, or we can be married to the confronting idea to the point where we disregard the other person's well-being. Now, how can we deal with faithful wounds well? We often don't deal with them well, but how can we deal with them well? We can be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And this is crucial for those of you who have seen previous videos. That sounds familiar, at least it should. In order to receive the faithful wounds, we can be quick to listen to the confronting idea. We can be slow to speak, giving ourselves enough silence, enough time to adequately process the merits of the idea. And then slow to anger, give ourselves enough time to consider the merits over our emotions. Because that's what's important. Truth is what's important, not necessarily our feelings. Our feelings matter, and we have feelings for a reason, but truth trumps our feelings. So we have to consider the merits of the idea over our emotions before we get angry about these wounds being administered, these hurtful words. And hurt is not a bad thing in and of itself. Sometimes it can be, but in and of itself, it's not a bad thing, because unfortunately, hurt is necessary for correction oftentimes in a fallen world. In order to give the faithful wounds well, we should be quick to listen. In order to properly diagnose the patient, who is our friend, we need to give ourselves enough time to adequately discern the true nature of the problem. That's slow to speak. And in doing so, giving ourselves that time to diagnose it, to discern the nature of the problem, we can formulate the most effective remedy for our friend. And slow to anger, slow to emotionally respond. We can take the time to empathize in anticipation of an emotional response. Now, if we're truly concerned about the patient, the friend of ours, and truly value the physician, again, the friend who's administering the wounds, then these governing principles are important. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. It's crucial. Now, obviously, the nature of wounds, they hurt, but they can be helpful. To apply traction, for instance, to a broken bone, to realign a displaced joint without the benefit of pain medication, pain is going to be necessary to get through the process. And even if you have some sort of anesthesia while going through that realignment of the bone or the joint, you're still going to experience pain afterward as a result of the trauma that took place while trying to realign the bone or the joint, while trying to make that correction. Same would apply to most other surgeries. That's just something, that's a principle that transcends all of creation, the physical world, the spiritual world. Pain is often necessary for correction and healing. So that's just a reality we have to deal with. That's something that we need to consider when we're both giving and receiving the faithful wounds. When we're receiving the faithful wounds, we understand, yeah, sometimes things are just going to hurt. It's necessary for things to hurt. When we're giving the faithful wounds, we understand, yeah, this may hurt. Let me not make this more painful than what it has to be. But what about the kisses of an enemy? Some people may pose as friends and flatter you or heap kind words onto you, but they have other motives than your well-being in mind. And this is especially harmful if what you need is the opposite of kind or consoling words. Perhaps you need correction or admonishment or even a warning instead. And this is how an enemy, unfortunately, can present themselves under the cover of profuse kisses. So watch out for them. I think there's a less obvious view of this as well, a less obvious presentation of profuse kisses. Consider Peter's confession concerning Christ in Matthew 16. Peter's confession was, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is after Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they gave him various answers. And he said, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." What a profound confession. But then consider what happened shortly after that profound confession. It says in Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 23, "From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Wow. So on the heels of such a profound confession that Jesus was the Son of God, Peter finds himself in the crosshairs of the label Satan. Why is that? Jesus explains, "For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Perhaps Peter got a little puffed up when he made that confession, and Jesus pointed out, yeah, you're right. Maybe didn't hear or really take in the fact that you did not arrive at this on your own, but the Father revealed that to you. Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. Perhaps there was even a bit of national pride that Peter had in anticipation, maybe in the back of his mind, maybe Jesus will overthrow the Roman government. Maybe that's a part of it. One thing is for certain, he did not have his mind set on the things of God, but on the things of man. Peter's failure to set his mind on the things of God led to his misunderstanding of the mission of Christ. With that misunderstanding came well-intentioned, yet utterly misguided and foolish rebuke. Peter likely thought he was presenting his rebuke for the good of Christ, but he was wrong. Perhaps he thought he was administering faithful wounds. He was wrong. The foundation of his rebuke was not truth. The foundation has to be truth. He had a concern for Jesus, but his response to this concern grossly missed the mark. And Peter made himself an enemy, a Satan, with his unwise rebuke in that moment. Now, Peter ultimately proved himself to be a friend of Christ. He was an appointed apostle. He was someone who wrote scripture. He was the one who preached the inaugural sermon on the day of Pentecost. So he eventually proved himself to be a friend of Christ, but in that moment, he was an enemy to the purpose of Christ. And I bring that up. I bring up Peter to show that the kisses of an enemy, they don't always have to come from a place of malice. Though we may not harbor ill will toward a prospective patient, of ours that we want to give those faithful wounds to, we can be an enemy to their well-being if our wounds are not grounded in truth. Now, imagine someone who persistently gives you well-intentioned advice, but it's most often ill-informed or lacking in truth. They may not harbor malice in their heart toward you, but their counsel will likely be damaging if it's followed. They may even present to you advice that they think will go down well, providing a spoonful of sugar. And maybe it does go down well. Maybe it's like, oh, maybe you receive it and you're like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. But they do this at the expense of soundness and effectiveness. They aim to kiss you, to spare you pain, even though pain is what you may desperately need. In other words, you need in that moment faithful wounds, but they're more concerned with your feelings and perhaps your feelings toward them. Think about it. So we need faithful wounds, not the kisses of an enemy, whether those kisses are intended or not. Now, when we're giving and receiving these faithful wounds, one last thing I want to say is that we need to assume the best of the individual on the other side. If I'm giving the faithful wounds, I need to assume that this person that I know, I'm assuming that you're going to know them well. We need to assume that this person that we know that we're giving these faithful wounds to is perhaps mistaken. Perhaps they don't have all of the information they need. Perhaps they have a misunderstanding. Maybe we need to clear something up. It's good to make that assumption because it helps to temper our delivery of these wounds, making them not any more painful than what they have to be. If we're on the receiving end, we need to assume that this person who's close to us, who's giving us these faithful wounds, has our best interest in mind. That they're not coming from a place of self-righteousness, from some sort of superiority, air of superiority, but they're coming with our best interest in mind. In all of this, it's an expression of love. And of course, the Bible tells us we are to love in deed and in truth. The foundation of it all must be truth, even at the expense of our comfortable feelings. And that goes for both sides. We can't be afraid to give the faithful wounds because it's going to be uncomfortable. And we can't be unwilling to receive the faithful wounds because it's going to be uncomfortable. Again, the foundation must be truth. In future videos, I'm hoping to deal with the idea of that foundation of truth, reality, the morality of logic and reason. Hopefully, I'll get to those things, but that's all I got for today. Faithful wounds. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. I'm out. May all of us decrease so that he might increase.